How do you teach them to sell product ethically? You've started out in the wrong spot. I would say that most lighting is bad, okay? There's really, really interesting statistics. It's only about 8 to 10% of all constructed projects have a lighting professional. So when you look at the hunger that the AV community has, it's both a good thing and something that has to be tamed. Everything that we do on a daily basis should be done for the benefit of our client. Any good architect and any good interior designer, they use good design practice. So, if you don't go into the beginning of a design with the right starting point, it's gonna fail every single time. Because then you end up with too many fixtures because you've lit the middle and then you go, oh crap, I've got to light the outside. It's like, what am I trying to do? How am I gonna do it? What light source, what fixture? In that order. I never start with the fixture. Because if you do, then you're not answering the question, what am I trying to do? So if you're not answering that question, what am I trying to do? You've started out in the wrong spot. And so when you educate an industry that's eager to learn, then that helps the entire lighting industry.
Welcome to the LytePOD, built by LyteEye, the #1 podcast for the people, process, and product behind design, all with a little love for light along the way. I'm your host, Sam Koerbel, and today we welcome Pete Romaniello to the podcast. Pete brings to us an incredible amount of enthusiasm around lighting. He's as much an advocate for the profession as he is a professor of it, as he is a practitioner of it. And today we're here to talk a little bit more about what it means to understand the fundamental nature of what you do with lights, where you put lights, how you place them in a space, the way to think about it. And then of course, who does that and what does that? And that's a lighting designer.
This episode is brought to you by Lightapalooza, a conference dedicated to educating and empowering custom home integrators across North America, providing training and certification programs, along with a full suite of product demonstrations and premier networking opportunities. As technology specialists learn how to adopt lighting as a new category, this event is leading the way, bringing an industry together. Lightapalooza ignites opportunity and enables integrators to thrive in the expanding world of architectural lighting. Visit lightapalooza.com to learn more. And now, let's get to know our guest a little bit more.
Pete, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks, I'm doing great.
Sitting here at Lightapalooza, which is an incredible event that has been spun up over the last 4 years to give people in the custom integration channel an opportunity to not only see light, but really dive in and learn more about lighting design, the best practices and principles of it. And at this point, you're a celebrity here. You're a mainstay. I think you taught seminars three different times today.
Yeah, I've had 3 today, 4 tomorrow, and 1 on Thursday. But that's pretty typical. I think that the importance of what I teach when I'm here is the things that people actually need to use on a daily basis. Like I don't think that it's good for people to go to a seminar and not walk away with information that they can go and use the next day. It's all got to be pertinent. It's all got to be about practice. And I don't teach anything that isn't exactly what I do on a daily basis. They should be learning how to do it correctly from somebody who does it all the time, right? It's not theory. It should be practice. You've got to find a way to make lighting accessible to them so that they understand it and they get engaged with it and they get excited about it, because then they have to do the same thing with their clients. They have to get them engaged so that it's not just a bunch of product, right? One of the things that I think is kind of inherently different is that as a professional lighting designer, I don't sell product at all. I have nothing to do with that. They do. And so how do you teach them how to design properly How do you teach them to sell product ethically? I'm not somebody that thinks that just because you sell product, it's unethical. It's whatever your industry allows you to do. Everything that we do on a daily basis should be done for the benefit of our client, right? Whoever owns that house, whoever's going to be living in that house, should be able to walk in and say, this is great. I'm really, really happy with everybody that I hired on this project, contractors, designers, you name it, and that I'm really pleased with the result, right? And if that is done and you can sell product, go ahead, right? That's just not something that I choose to do with my business.
As we dive into our conversation today, there's an opportunity to unpack maybe some practical nuances, right? Why does it matter? Why does it matter where lights go in a space?
Well, there's a lot to that. The first thing that I would say is that there's an incredibly high level of interest within the CI channel, okay? And about 9 years ago, I actually went to people I knew at Lutron, and I said, look, you've got AV integrators who are starting to design with lighting. And I've always taken the opinion that, look, everybody designs lights, right? I'm not somebody that has this opinion that, oh, you can't do this because you're not a lighting designer. The reality is that everybody has forever. So I went to Lutron and I said, I want to teach the AV industry because if they're going to do it, they should be doing it correctly. And so then that kind of translated into speaking for HTSA and I was speaking for Lightapalooza. And the whole idea is that, look, I don't care who does it. If you're going to do it well, right? And so when you educate an industry that's eager to learn, then that helps the entire lighting industry, right? Because if there's really, really interesting statistics. It's only about 8 to 10% of all constructed projects have a lighting professional on it. And I look at that and I say, like, well, why isn't that 50%? And it's not 50% because the lighting industry has been very insular for decades. They don't share information. They don't get people excited about lighting. And so I've always looked at it as like, look, you're not taking business away from me. There's more than enough work if we tripled the number of lighting designers because we need that, right? And one of the things that's happened over the years just within the lighting design community is that if all of us are busy and you get calls and you have to turn away projects because you can't take it on, then what happens is it perpetuates the problem, which is that non-lighting people are now continuing to light spaces. So when you look at the hunger that the AV community has, it's both a good thing and something that has to be tamed, right? Because you can have that desire to get into the industry and to start doing lighting in some way, shape, or form, but I think do it well. One of the things that I've said in my seminars this morning, and I'll continue to say it tomorrow, is that in an industry where everybody in the design and construction industry thinks that they can do lighting design, your job now, as somebody else who thinks they can do lighting design, is to do it better than everybody else, no matter who that is, right? It doesn't matter what letters are after your name. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. Just do it better, right? And if we all took that approach, then hopefully the lighting industry as a whole improves.
They know there's a totem pole. It needs to be climbed. I don't think anybody here expects the climb to be an easy one. And a lot of what you have sat and chatted with these folks is, placement, understanding, where to put stuff. So how do you like to approach that conversation and what do you like to share with them?
I think that at the end of the day, architectural lighting is the skeleton. It's the basis for the rest of the lighting design, right? So when you take something as I'm going to say ubiquitous to design as recessed fixtures, for example. If you have them in the wrong location, you can't fix that, right? So when you think about any good design, there are principles to good design. There are common rules of thumb that you have to employ. And that starts with the very, very basics of distance off of wall and distance apart, right? When you look at, I would say that most lighting is bad, okay? A high percentage of lighting is bad. And a high percentage of lighting is bad is because it's looked at as just a bunch of holes on the ceiling, right? When you look at how, I would say, non-lighting people look at lighting, they look at it as some array of openings on a reflected ceiling plan. And the biggest difference between somebody that knows lighting and somebody that doesn't know lighting is that we think about what happens when the illumination comes out of the fixture, as opposed to how does it line up with something on the ceiling. You know, when people walk into a space, they immediately look in front of them. They don't look up. We do, because we're nerds, right? And we want to figure out stuff like that. But most people, when you walk into a space and it's lit well, you're typically not looking at what's lighting it. And especially people, right? People are clients, they're homeowners. You know, they should walk into a space and say, my house is beautiful. Not, oh, look at that fixture, it's 2'3" off the wall, right? Or why isn't that centered in a coffer? And so if you are starting in lighting, or even if you've been in it forever, you have to start with good principles of design. Any good architect and any good interior designer, they use good design practice, right? You don't design a crazy staircase if you're an architect without respecting the whatever that ratio is of rise to run, right? Because everybody's going to trip down the stairs. Okay? You don't do something crazy with lighting just to be different and avant-garde. Residential lighting in particular is that you start with the perimeter of the room and then you work your way inwards. And unfortunately, a lot of people that don't know what they're doing or are new to the industry fall into the trap of, let's say, generally lighting a space with some array of downlights in the middle of the room. But that doesn't light the space. We light walls. And the reason that we light walls is we get soft indirect light off of those surfaces, but more importantly, where are people looking? They're looking at the walls. They're not looking at the floor. They're not looking at the ceiling. And where do they hang their artwork? And everything that's important to them, it goes on the walls. So if you don't start with that, then you're kind of putting all your eggs in the wrong basket and lighting the wrong things to start. So, you know, if you don't go into the beginning of a design with the right starting point, it's going to fail every single time, because then you end up with too many fixtures because you've lit the middle and then you go, oh crap, I've got to light the outside, right? And so that becomes a mess, that Swiss cheese on the ceiling that nobody likes. It's very hard because I would say that our industry in particular is based on recessed fixtures. And that doesn't make them inherently good or bad. But if that tool is used incorrectly, then it doesn't work. If people don't understand it and they keep doing it wrong and nobody knows that it's wrong, like you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you are a lighting designer, or that would be rare, but if you are somebody who's done the lighting for years, right? And you've never gone and seen that project in the evening. You've never aimed a light. You've never gotten feedback from an owner that this was either good or bad. Then you're going to continue with those bad practices, right? And so a lot of times we will be asked to evaluate a plan, or we'll get a plan from an architect and say, okay, now we need you to fix this, right? So they'll usually start with something because they've got to put something on the plans for a permit set. And that's the most garbage thing ever, usually, because they just want to see some lights there. But I will immediately look at two things distance off the wall based on the ceiling height, and lateral spacing. Because there are some people that get into these kind of very incorrect methods that are hard and fast to them. So for example, you might get somebody who says, I always put an adjustable accent 27 inches off the wall. And I would say to that, what about the ceiling height? Shouldn't that move back as the ceiling height goes up? Right? So those I always ... that never works because it's not being flexible for the conditions of the space. And if you got to think about an analogy with an architect, if you say, I always use a 7-foot tall door, then that might be good on a 9-foot ceiling. But if you do that on a 12-foot ceiling, that's a minuscule door. It's out of scale, right? So if you don't have a hard and fast rule on a door, then why do you have a hard and fast rule for placement of a recessed fixture? And the reality is that as the ceiling height goes up, that fixture has to go farther out, regardless of the I always ... because it's wrong, right? And so I can look at a set of plans and know right off the bat whether or not somebody knows what they're doing based on the distance off the wall and what they're trying to do, right? So it's somewhat easy to look at that. But I think that, the bigger underlying problem is that we have an industry that number one, doesn't get feedback, negative or positive, because the homeowners typically don't know whether what they have is good or bad, because they haven't been shown what's good or bad, right? And on top of that, we've had an industry that literally, the entire time that I've been into it, it demeans everything that it's doing. In residential construction, lighting is part of a construction budget. It needs to come out of that, and it needs to become FF&E, furnishings, finishings, and equipment, right? So if you look at what everything that the AV industry does, that's FF&E. FF&E is, hey, if a homeowner wants to buy this, then they're just going to take money out of another pocket and they're going to pay you, right? And the contractors typically don't care because it doesn't affect their construction budget because it's unnecessary, right? It's totally a luxury. And if you get a homeowner that wants to pay for it, go ahead all day long, right? So if you look at the other things that are typically part of a construction budget, they fall into the FF&E budget of an interior designer. So if a contractor in their cost says, we're going to give you an allowance for a countertop, then that's either the appropriate amount or it's not the appropriate amount or somewhere in the middle, right? But if the interior designer says, hey, we're going to pick this really, really custom stone that you can only get from these remote mines in Italy, and it's going to take you 17 months to get it, but it's going to be the best thing ever. And oh, by the way, it's $1,000 a linear foot. Then the client could go like, yeah, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to apply that allowance to it, and I know I'm going to go way over, but I've seen it and I love it, right? When it comes to lighting, they have a budget that is not based on anything other than, well, this keeps me under a particular cost per square foot, right? And if I increase the cost of those recessed fixtures from $50 a piece to $400 a piece, then how much is that going to add to the cost per square foot, right? Contractors' main concern is not quality of illumination. It's get the project done on time and on budget and increase their profitability, which we all should care about profitability, okay? But the reality is that if you have a project that needs better lighting, then most of the time it's hard to bring that out of a construction line item or to have somebody say, you know what, the contractor has given me a $50,000 allowance for all of my architectural lighting, and it's really going to cost $250,000, okay? But Does that $200,000 then get added into the construction budget, or does it become the homeowner wants to spend that, so they're just going to pay that extra amount?
What's your direct mentality around the questions you want to ask yourself, you want to ask your collaborators and the client in order to start to figure out where to put lights in a space?
There's two categories of questions. And I think it's also important to understand like what you're being asked to do on every project. You know, not every single project that we do goes all the way from schematic design through aiming the lights at the end, commissioning, right? There are times where we're just asked to do the design, get them a plan and specs. And if anything else happens after that, that's great, right? And I accept that. And I think that what that's done for me personally is it puts even more importance on getting it right. Because now I really have one opportunity. You have to understand the space and the construction of that space, and then you have to understand the use, the programmatic use of that, right? And understanding how important or not important lighting is to that client. And then respecting that. You know, good lighting is meant to reinforce architecture and make the home beautiful and meet the client's needs. That's it in a nutshell. It's not about me. And it's so funny because like I think back to my degree in theatrical lighting design, and I had this amazing professor. He's actually still alive, and man, he beat it into our heads that we've done our job well when nobody notices the lighting. And I think that unfortunately a lot of times people just start jumping in and popping in holes, drawing in circles on their plan, doing arrays in CAD, whatever it is. And it's like, no, you have to think about that space. If you were an architect and somebody came to your office and they said, I looked at your website, you have some really, really cool looking houses. I'd love to have you design the house. Here's $10,000 to get started, or $1 million, whatever it is, and come back to me in 4 months with a set of plans. You think that house is going to be what they want? Of course not. That architect has to ask 1 billion questions about how they live. What do they like? What do they not like, right? How do they expect it to feel? And if I don't do the same thing with lighting, then I'm missing the boat.
You mentioned construction and understanding the construction of the space. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. The construction, like we work on projects all over the country, okay? There's a difference in the way that a house is built in South Florida than it is in a suburb of Boston, than it is in a high-rise in Chicago. So you have to understand construction, because the construction limits or allows you to do certain things. We do a lot of projects in Manhattan. And in Manhattan, you might be working in a pre-war building. Okay, pre-war building means that you don't have a plenum space. That means you're not using recessed fixtures. Does that mean that you don't light artwork and you don't light the walls? No, you have to be creative to think of different ways to do that, right? And so even though people might not enjoy hearing the words track heads and monopoints, a lot of times you're using track heads and monopoints because your principles have to stay the same. Like process is important. And I have a very simple 4-question process that I go through with every single project. And again, I don't write them down. They're just inherent in my process, my thoughts. It's like, what am I trying to do? How am I going to do it? What light source, what fixture? In that order. I never start with the fixture. Because if you do, then you're not answering the question, what am I trying to do? So if you're not answering that question, what am I trying to do? You've started out in the wrong spot. If you only have 2 inches of plenum space and people say, I want something adjustable, then you have to have the, I would say, intestinal fortitude to tell them, you know what, you need to lower that ceiling another 1.5 inches, or you can't do that. Whether they want to do that or not. Sometimes you have to be the bearer of bad news and tell them, you know what, I understand you want to keep the ceiling heights as high as possible. But that means that you're either going to have to do something that's outside the ceiling, but you just told me it needs to be recessed, so now you've got to increase that plenum depth.
You can call it a domino effect, right? One decision always pushes over to the next.
Always. And you have to sometimes let them answer it for themselves, right? I'll give you a perfect example. I started by saying that you light the perimeter of the room and then you work your way inwards, right? If you then think about that and how it applies to a family room or a great room or living room, whatever you want to call that, main hangout space, you have a limited number of options in most homes of how you're going to do that. It's either table and floor lamps or a decorative fixture or a combination of both or recessed downlights or a combination of all three. And so if a client says, all right, well, I don't want table and floor lamps because I've got massive pieces of furniture, big sectional, and it doesn't allow for that. And I don't want a decorative fixture because I'm concerned about blocking views based on the ceiling height, whatever, okay, fine. So you're left with downlights. Now, most people don't like sitting under downlights because it's inherently uncomfortable. So now, if you look at that and you say, like, all right, the most important characteristic of those downlights is to create soft, wide, ambient light over that space. It typically needs more of them because you've got to overlap your beam spreads and make them soft and wide so that you don't have one person sitting on a sofa that's super bright and another person right next to them that's not in a light, right? And so then when they look at the set of plans and they go, oh my God, that's a lot of lights, you go, yes, it is. And when they say, how do you reduce that? You say, how about we introduce that decorative fixture? Because that would replace 4 to 6 of those downlights in the middle of the room, right? So sometimes you let them answer that question.
I think a lot of integrators and dealers take the showroom approach of just demonstrating it. But there is also a way to explain design theory and take people on a journey where if a demo is not possible, you can still get people excited about lighting. In your 3 decades of experience, how have you found a way to get homeowners excited about the value and quality of light without physically being able to show them, quote, bad lighting and then good lighting?
I have thousands of images that I've taken over the years of good lighting and bad lighting that I've done and other people have done, right? And so I'm able to say, like, hey, in the living room, we talked about doing some indirect lighting here to wash the ceiling because we've got this awesome vaulted ceiling. Look at this image. See how this is lighting this space? Like, it helps them to understand it, because the reality is that even if I was down the street from the project, the reality is that you can't mock up everything. You have to be able to articulate lighting and get people engaged in it on an emotional level so that then they have perceived value. And when you're able to explain things and point out things to them, then they understand it, right? A lot of times when I have even initial client meetings, we're talking about things and we're looking through the plans, and I'll say, like, if you're seated at the dining room here on this side, you're actually looking into the hallway right off the foyer, and that's a really, really great place for a piece of artwork. We should probably like that. And they go, I never thought about that, right? Because they think just, here's the dining room. But no. That's open architecture, right? So if I'm thinking about that room, I have to think about that wall down there that people can see while they're in the dining room. And you end up bringing up and pointing out all of these things that they hadn't even thought about, about the importance of this and the importance of that and how that decision impacts this decision, right? Because they really never talk to somebody about lighting that way. We have this really, really weird time in lighting where we have incredible technology that is kind of fighting against really, really bad perceptions of light and thoughts about lighting that are still stuck in the 80s, right? Whether that is an approach to design or an approach to fixtures or a combination of both. And one of the examples that I use all the time of bad lighting is the, quote, 4 cans and a fan method, okay? Now, people that have heard me speak before know that I hate the term can. I hate the term hi-hat. I hate the term pot light. It's a recess fixture, right? And if you're talking about something, you shouldn't demean what it is, because it's very hard for someone in the AV industry, the CI channel, to try to sell something that's a $400 can. That's a plaything, right? It's a recessed light. You don't have to get pretentious and call it a recessed luminaire. That's like so haughty, right? Just tell it what it is. It's a downlight, it's a wall washer, it's an adjustable accent. Because even within recessed lights, they're not all downlights, right? They actually do have different functions. One of the examples that I've always used, I love architecture, nerd, and I think that Frank Lloyd Wright is, obviously a genius, but I revere what he did, and when you look at his designs, and you really pay attention to his philosophy, multiple philosophies, it was so simplistic and yet perfect, right? When you walk into his houses and you understand the whole notion of compression and release, right? The fact that you go into a lower ceiling space, the compression, and then you go into the higher ceiling space, the release, and what that does to your perception of that space. It's fascinating. But I also appreciated what he did with light, because he was a lighting designer before there was even such a thing as lighting design, right? He was incorporating light into architectural details before you could even do that. And he did it. And it was unbelievable, right? How he harnessed natural light and how he incorporated artificial light. So when I look at technology, one of the examples that he used with Frank Lloyd Wright is that if he was to design falling water now in 2025, or if he was to design Taliesin West in 2025, it would still be amazing because it's great design.
Enhancing the architecture and meeting the client's needs are kind of those two fundamental pillars of, quote, good design. As custom integrators take the dive into the technical world of lighting, they seem to really, want to understand and nail fundamentally how this all gets controlled, because they're installing control systems in the house that do other things. But the design aspect of it, the creative aspect of it, isn't their strongest forte. How can they look to interface with those like yourself who've committed their lifelong passion and purpose to design intent?
It's hard.
What questions do they ask? Who do they call? Where do they go? What can they explore on their own if they don't have an opportunity to interface with someone based on a short timeline?
All things can be headed off with really, really good communication. And I know that within the lighting design community, there are really, really great lighting designers that are, I'm going to be nice here, I'm going to say they're taken aback by the fact that now there's somebody in the AV community that's stepping on their turf, right? And there's been a lot of pushback. I'm being very frank about this. There's been a lot of pushback from people in the high-end residential lighting design community, like, hey, you can't do that. And I think that when it works out correctly, you have an AV integrator that understands they don't want to cut off their nose to spite their face, right? They still have to work with that lighting designer because they're still going to be doing projects in that market. So if you're established as a high-end AV integrator, you're working on the same projects, right? So you really have to think about, from a business model, are you filling a need for projects where they're underneath that, where they're not going to have a lighting designer, and you're trying to only go after that? Or are you trying to go after somebody who's been doing it for 30 years, right? It doesn't bug me because, as I said before, there's more than enough work for all of us, right? But if you then go after those projects that somebody else is working on that you've been, doing the AV, they're going to be upset. So the best thing you can do, first of all, is if you have plans of doing that, if you have plans of doing your own lighting design as a service of your AV company, then the first thing that you should do is reach out to the lighting designers in that area and say, look, I don't want it to be word on the street is so-and-so is trying to take your projects. So we know that there's a need in the market for the projects that you're not going to get hired on, right? There's a step below that. Not everything is something where they're going to, hire a lighting designer and do super high-end lighting. there's a need below that, which is still custom work, right? But it's not that. And we're only trying to service those clients. And you know what? On top of that, when we have a project that is above our pay grade, we're going to tell them to call you. That's how you handle things. You know, we all have to work together, right? I mean, there's an AV integrator, Spire integrated, Navot Suresh, awesome dude. I personally hold him on the Mount Rushmore of the AV industry. And they have a great in-house lighting designer. Gabby Schneider. She's awesome. And yet they know there are projects that are above her ability or their ability where it's easier for them to bring in a lighting designer, whether it's me or somebody in the area. They know when it's time to step back, right? And I think that the caution that I would give to everybody in the CI channel is just to know your capabilities and be respectful of people in your area that you still need to work with. And that should kind of smooth things over. If you're just going, you know, full head of steam and you're going to try to take every project, then that could really end up biting you in the butt badly. Not necessarily because you might burn some relationships, but because you might not be talented enough to do those projects. If you make one mistake with color, you make one mistake with dimming, you make one mistake with light output, and then you have an upset client and you've got to rip out fixtures, and you have to eat it, you're never going to do that again. So we kind of found that in 2012 to 2014, our business took this huge jump because people realized, you know what, I actually do need somebody who knows what they're doing because the technology is difficult, right? And so, you know, I guess the good thing about the CI channel is that you do understand technical stuff, right? They are troubleshooting dimming issues, let's say, while they're programming that system. Whether they picked out the lighting or whether they designed the lighting at all, they're doing that. And so, you know, in some respects, there's this symbiotic relationship between me and the AV channel because they're controlling my lights, right? But it's like they're helping to implement my design. Yes. And so we have to work together. You know, it has to be a really, really good relationship. And the other reason I think that it's important is very similar to my relationship with electrical contractors in that, you know, in a weird analogy, I'm a painter and they're actually moving the brush. I said, use this color here and this color here, but they're painting it, right? And so we all have to work together. And I know this is like, you know, kumbaya and all that, but it's true because they're also at the job site way more than I am, kind of like, I don't know, every day. And I might be there every 3 months or every 6 months. And so, you know, if the electrical contractor or the AV people are like, oh God, Pete's such a pain in the ass to work with, right? I'm just going to do what I want to do because I don't really care about him. That doesn't work. But if they say, you know what, like, I know that I can call up Pete and get an answer in a second, right? Or he can help me. We all have to help each other. And again, like that comes back to my theatrical training. You know, if you're a theatrical lighting designer, you're not hanging the fixtures. You've got to work with union stagehands. Union stagehands are a breed upon themselves, right? And you cannot make them mad or they're not going to work for you, right? So you know, there is a psychology to working with people. And at the end of the day, we all just want to be treated with respect. And we don't want to be told we're stupid, right? And we don't want to be told that we don't matter by somebody who's got a big ego. It's like, look, put it all aside and let's, at the end of the day, make this an awesome project for the homeowner.
It's all about being awesome in terms of delivering something that the client and the owner is happy with. Pete, keep crushing it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for teaching so many people. Thanks for dedicating so much of your own time to support an industry that wants to grow, that wants to learn. I'm sure that this is a conversation in and of itself that can be useful and helpful to people. If people want to get in touch with you, if they have more questions, what's the best way they can get in touch with you? 2
different ways. I'll give you my email. So the first easy thing is our website is conceptuallighting.com, 2 L's pushed together in the middle. And then my email address is pete@conceptuallighting.com. Best thing to do is just send me an email and I'll help you out with whatever you need.
Go find Pete if you have questions. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Appreciate it.